someone got in my car yesterday. I knew they were getting in my car. I know them. And the first thing he says is, "Oh man, I gained 10 pounds these last 2 weeks. There are just too many sweets around my house within reach." Anyone else experience that? Like for some reason we just bake more, other people bake more, or people drop things off, and it's just accessible. And when it's accessible, you eat it. Like when it's in the house, there's not a way of avoiding it. And he's like, "I gained 10 pounds. I need to not do the things within reach." Here's a fun one. I'm not going to ask you to do it. I thought about it. But if you're feeling very courageous going into this year, when's the last time you checked your phone's screen time data? Is anyone? Yeah, it's a terrifying thought, isn't it? You don't want to know how much time you spend on your phone and or how much time you spend on specific apps. That's the real scare. Like I can sit there and justify, oh, look at how many hours on YouTube. I'm like, well, actually, it's a place in which I learn, right? But I do quickly try to dismiss the time I get stuck in just the scrolling of YouTube shorts, which the younger generation says I'm an old man for doing because they do such things as TikTok and others that I don't do. But your screen time. Are you aware of how much time you spend on your phone? Try it on today. You don't have to do it now. I want to encourage you to be brave and courageous and face how much time you spend there. These last two things are ways of just realizing that we have so much access within reach. The amount of things around us, from our cupboards to our dessert tables around the holidays, to our phone, to our web browser, to just about anything, from dating apps, you can just keep going down the list. We have so much access. We have so much access at our fingertips to reach for something when we are in need. When we're feeling a certain way, when we're experiencing a certain thing, we have an incredible amount of go-tos. And like my friend who said, I gained 10 pounds over the holidays because it was within reach, I think the question I want to ask us this morning is it beneficial to get more of what you want when you want it? Is it actually beneficial that anytime you feel something, you can pull out this little glowing rectangle in your pocket and just exercise whatever you're feeling or whatever you're thinking, or trying to dismiss whatever you're thinking or whatever you're feeling, or maybe whoever you're with? I don't know. You can take your pick. Is it beneficial to have all of this at our fingertips, to have a consistent rate in which we can always be doing something or grabbing towards something? Is it beneficial for you to get more of what you want when you want it? Because I would argue that despite having everything at our fingertips, we can still be left anxious. We can still be left disconnected, though we're with people constantly. We can still feel very pulled apart inside and in our relationships. We have a solve-all for nearly anything. There's a book for everything. There's a podcast for this. There's a podcast. It's not that you don't have enough information for everything to be fixed inside of you and around you. But the reality is that a lot of these ways in which we start to access certain things at certain moments, again, the cupboard, the pantry, the web browser, the people, the binging of Netflix. I mean, you just go down the list. Is it beneficial? Is it helpful? Or do you start to do certain things over time, like just over-functioning? You actually, because of how much access, you end up overworking, you end up overspending, you end up overeating. Maybe because of certain access, you actually feel the need just to control people more, to control the context around you. Maybe you become just more critical and judgmental of other people, or you feel just distant and disconnected. And over and again, every time you reach for something, you're still left feeling some of this, even if it dissipates for a moment. You're still searching. You still want something more. It's almost as if these desires are pointing to a greater need inside of us. When we reach for these things, when we pull something in, when we push something out, it's actually pointing to something deeper. And I wonder if our constant connection and access to things actually keeps us from going to those deeper places in which we have need. Are you similar to me in this area at all? the rate at which you're feeling certain things, and then you can respond immediately. Is that beneficial to your life? And maybe this year, maybe you feel okay in those other areas, but as you enter 2025, you feel distant from God. You actually don't feel like connected to a creator or your creator. You still do this church thing, you still believe to read scripture, to give, to serve, to do whatever it is, but it doesn't actually feel like anything's happening in your relationship with God. It doesn't actually feel like he's real or present in your life. It doesn't feel like you're transforming or changing or molding into this person of peace or grace or love. You still just feel disconnected. And maybe this is the year in which you're like, I think I'm going to give Jesus a shot. I want to figure out, is God real? And you're here today asking that question. Is God real? And yet you feel disconnected and distant and maybe even burnt out on some of the ways in which you're trying to find life with God. And I wonder for us at large, what if the answer isn't fulfilling more of your and I's desires? What if it's not about just responding to the needs or the thoughts that we have, but in actually stepping away from them so we can truly find what does desire us? To actually resist the things you'd most naturally go to. To actually not do what you normally do when you feel anxious. To actually not go to the thing in which you normally go to in which you're feeling sadness and grief and loss. To not respond in the normal way in which you respond when you're angry or resentful. What if there's a different way of being so that you can get to the deeper desires that you have, to where the things that you normally try on that are fleeting, it actually brings a depth inside of you where you can experience more love and connectedness and meaning and purpose. And so for the next few weeks, sacred resistance is going to be our topic. That you and I might actually be able to resist the things we most naturally go towards. And that in that, we can turn towards what's sacred. We can turn towards something that's bigger than ourselves, that can actually ground us and root us and give us a foundation to live from that feels more secure than the normal ways in which we operate, and the ways in which things operate around us. And key word in there is resistance. A very countercultural and a counterintuitive thought. You don't wake up this morning or 2025 being, what are all the things I can resist in my life this year? I mean, New Year's resolutions are usually about turning something on. I'm going to start this. I'm going to start doing that. I'm always going to do this now. It's about implementing and doing. And actually, we could find more in stripping away. We could find more, and rather than saying, I'm going to start doing all these things, I'm actually going to do less of this. I'm actually going to push against something, and it could be in that friction that you and I actually grow. Because it's my belief that if you and I don't have a proper amount of challenge in our life, we will just drift. You will just do more of what you naturally do, and there'll be moments in which that's okay, but at the end of the day, you begin to feel more and more empty. You wonder more and more, what is even the purpose of my work? Well, why isn't there supposed to be more meaning in this life? It's supposed to be beyond what I'm just experiencing right now. You and I need challenge and friction, and the reality of resistance also helps us push against ourselves, because those who devote themselves to themselves eventually lose themselves. When your entire life revolves around you, not that you don't do things for people, not that you're with others, not that you're nice, not that you don't do service, but when everything keeps coming to an inward-looking thing of how am I? Who am I? And what's going on here? And what am I feeling? And what am I thinking? And then it starts to implement work in our faith. Well, I'm feeling off with God because I'm feeling this way. Or I'm starting to think this way about, and I don't really know where I'm at. And then we just kind of drift. And we have a culture in which is telling you to devote yourself to yourself, because many people benefit from that, especially those who get your dollars. Over and over and over again, those who devote themselves to themselves will eventually lose themselves. And so is there a better way? Is there a way which when you and I can actually find transformation in resistance and turning to what's sacred, turning to something beyond ourselves, turning to something that is rooted in history, something that has meaning and purpose beyond our fleeting life today, beyond the breaths that I'm taking right now. And I would offer to you today one of the greatest things that you and I could do this year is fasting. The practice of fasting. How many people fast right now? Good. Got a few hands. Here and there, here. Yeah. Okay. Now, here's the reality. When I bring up fasting, there's a thing that your mind goes to right away. And I'll talk more about what we're talking about with fasting. But the reality is that fasting is a culturally popular thing right now. There is people fasting right now in January from alcohol because it's called dry January. Right? That is a common thing. My buddy that runs Out of the Barrel and Fig Garden, I was talking to him a while ago. He's like, yep, January is rough. We get a lot less people coming in and buying craft beer from us. And it's a thing. You get sober in November. There's people who go on social media fast and they got to announce to the whole world, I'm sure some of us have done this in the room, I am not going to be on here for the next month because all of you are waiting for me to post. But I will be back, but I'm going to take a fast. There's a Daniel fast. There's other food fasting in which we limit and restrict the type of food in which we eat. Some of us, unfortunately, have to fast. Some of us, because of diagnosis or the way our bodies work, we actually do have to fast from food. And so when we bring up fasting, this could bring up a lot of tension inside of you. Because you're like, I would rather eat a lot more. I don't want to have to live this way. And that's a reality also. But when I'm talking about fasting, there's a difference of abstinence and fasting. What I named so far is mostly just giving something up. To actually stop doing something, to resist something. You know, in Lent, we give up chocolate. That's abstinence. I am choosing not to have that. Fasting is not only choosing to not have something, it's also choosing to turn towards something. It's saying I don't want to depend on this thing in which I normally depend on. I'm going to depend on something different than what I normally depend on. And so, yes, you can fast from chocolate. That's a very real thing. We'd have to talk about how much does chocolate mean in your life. Is it something you depend on or is it something you enjoy? If it's just something you enjoy, then you're abstaining from it. You could argue that throughout history, people have fasted from food. Right now in our culture, maybe one of the stronger ways of fasting could be from technology. Because we could argue that your and I's lives are surrounded by and surround our engagement with technology. If I was to ask you to turn off your phone right now, people might leave. Because that's a scary thought. What do you mean? Like wait, well, what about, and then and what if they need, and we just start doing this whole thing, right? You ever do like the phantom thing where like, oh, I think I got a text message and like nothing came through? Like your body just like needs a hit from your phone? Yeah, seriously. Am I the only one? Or sometimes I just like tap my phone to look at the screen. I know what time it is. I know no alerts have come through, but I'm just like, it just lights up for a second. You guys feel that? Like our involvement, the what we depend on, nourishment for our bodies, and maybe technology for the rest of our lives in so many ways. What I'm talking about is fasting. I'm going to invite us in, and I want to talk about a few things around it, and then I actually want to invite us into a way of fasting maybe this week to try it on, and maybe this year if you're feeling courageous and brave. But while it's forgotten about, it's not as culturally popular for us right now, at its most basic need is not eating. And again, we can talk around other ways of implementing this. But at its core, it's you and I resisting food, not eating for a defined period of time. And we see this throughout church history. We see this throughout global history. People have fasted for thousands of years. Every other religion has deep, ingrained fasting practices, a way of devoting themselves to what they say they believe. And before we think that's extreme, many of the religions in the East would look at our Western Christianity and laugh at us and say, you believe a lot of things, but you act on none of them. Throughout the scriptures, we see some of the earliest writings around fasting through the Old Testament. Some of our main characters that we look to for wisdom in life and guidance of how they related to God and to other people, they fasted deeply and regularly. Over and over again, we see how deep fasting is in the life with God. And by the time of Jesus, it was common practice. We'll get to a text in a second, but he talked to people as if they were already fasting. It was common practice for people to fast 2,000 years ago in culture, but mainly in their life with God. And the Christians practiced this beyond Jesus. It continued, and even one of the ways would be the Day of Atonement annually, where they would gather together and they would fast as a community to remember their dependence on the mercy and the grace of God and face the reality of their own brokenness and depravity. Fasting is something that, why not as relevant to us today, is something that is deeply relevant to life with God. Deeply relevant to what it looks like to offer ourselves, to devote ourselves to something greater than ourselves. Because again, those who devote themselves to themselves will eventually lose themselves. Now, real quick, as I talk a little bit more about fasting, disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. I do not just give out medical advice here. When we talk about food and fasting, you have doctors in your life, and you have your own discernment and wisdom, and I am offering that back to you. None of this is necessarily, Ryan said I need to not eat for 40 days. I do not recommend that. There's also realities in which you might be pregnant. You might be nursing. There might be something medically in your body that does not respond to giving up food. And so there's a lot of nuances to this in which it's not just some blanket command, but I do think there's other ways in which we can still look to find ways of resisting something and turning towards something else. And I've mentioned some of them already. But what happens in our body, this is fascinating. We know that when we eat a meal, we get energy from it. For about 4 hours, our body will actually find energy by the food that is in our stomachs. When some of you do intermittent fasting, something that I do, I'd probably be 15 pounds heavier if not, dead serious. But I choose to not eat until about 10 a.m. in the morning. I try to cut off at 8 p.m. But right around 14, 16 hours, your body shifts from finding energy on the food that is in your stomach, and it actually starts to eat on the fat in your body. And it does this thing called ketosis. It is actually pretty healthy for us. We eat more than culture really ever has in so many ways, and we eat a lot more than many cultures even today. Then what starts to happen beyond that? When we start to go without food for 24 hours, a longer period of time, there's a Greek word actually, of autography and autophagy. And what happens here is essentially it's a way of your body taking out the trash. Your body is no longer feeding on the food that's in your stomach or the fat that's in your body. It's actually starting to get rid of and work out and dispose of the bad cells in your body. This is actually something that starts to do this kind of stuff in your body. That next list. So if I was a doctor, I'd be able to just rattle this off. Cleanses your body of toxins, increases your metabolism, reduces your weight, it can lower your insulin levels, inflammation and blood pressure, strengthen your immune system, reduce your heart rate, slow aging, protect against and possibly reverse many diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and a range of neurological disorders, including Alzheimer's. It's almost as if fasting was designed for our bodies, or our bodies were designed for fasting. It's almost as if what people have practiced for thousands and thousands of years in their life with God was because it was intended to do something for you and I. Now, before we get stuck on the health benefits that can come, and then we can also talk about the neurological wiring that's happening with our use with technology and social media and how we can resist that. So again, there's more ways than just food if food is not a way for us. But it's important to note that as a practice of fasting, yes, while there's helpful things for our body, we do not want to lose sight of and we want to keep in front of us the spiritual realities, implications, and benefits of fasting. This quote here, I think, kind of sums it up. Pope Benedict says, "In our own day, fasting seems to have lost something of its spiritual meaning and has taken on, in a culture characterized by the search for material well-being, a therapeutic value for the care of one's body. Fasting certainly brings benefits of physical well-being, but for believers, it is, in the first place, a therapy to heal all that prevents them from conformity to the will of God." If you want to experience more God in your life this year, I offer you fasting. If you want to create spaces in which you're less dependent on the things that do not satisfy your desires and you want to move towards to the one who can only satisfy most of your desires, I offer to you fasting. I offer to you a way to resist the things that you normally gravitate towards to. The things that you use and do to fill up the things that you feel and need inside. When you feel anxious, when your needs aren't being met, when you feel low, even when you feel great and happy, we still have impulses and things in which we go to that point to the deeper desires that you and I have, that many things are fleeting and will not meet. Where right now in your life do you find yourself trying to meet the deeper desires that you have within? What is your response to the people and the context around you? What are the ways in which you're engaging and disengaging? What are the ways in which you're spending your time? What are the ways in which you're spending your money? These are all connected to the ways in which we're trying to meet the deeper needs inside of ourselves. Fasting is a way to say no. Like hitting the checkout button one more time online is not going to fully meet that need. Using the dating app one more time is not going to fill that need. Taking on the next parenting book to perfect the way in which I do things is not fully going to meet that need. Working more to get to the next promotion is not going to fully meet that need. Over and over and over again. Fasting says, God, I want to resist the ways in which I naturally go to create space to experience you, so that I can be reminded of where my actual dependence is, so that I can be reminded of your activity in my life, so I can be reminded that you invite me to be nourished by you, to come to the well, to drink of the water that will quench all of my thirst. Fasting is a way to disrupt the ways in which you naturally live by and fulfill yourself, and to turn towards something greater than yourself. Jesus said this in Matthew 6, when you fast, talking to those around him, as we look at every other scripture, talking to us, when you fast. Not, hey, if you're choosing to fast in your life. Hey, if you're doing this really hard thing because you're just like extra spiritual. No. When you're fasting, because you already have that built into your life. Early Christians would do it twice a week, usually Wednesdays and Fridays. When you're fasting, you notice that? He's assuming that we're doing something like fasting. He says, when you're fasting, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disguise their faces to show others they are fasting. It's weird that even something like spiritual practices can still be a way in which we're devoting ourselves to ourselves. And we will eventually lose ourselves. The things in which we do to grow in our life with God and to open ourselves to the Spirit, the formation of His Spirit, are not for me to see the praises or get the praises of other people. It is for my relationship with God, which then works out to the relationship with other people. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full, but when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Reward there is not necessarily that all of a sudden like $1 million checks are going to start showing up in your mailbox that you look for every once in a while. Like, is this the day that's going to finally happen? It's that you're in a posture of receptivity. You're pausing to say, I don't need to keep going and gaining and doing more, but I can actually receive. That God is inviting you and I to be in a posture of receptivity, to receive something that we may not be able to get ourselves. And while this, again, may not be as common today, I believe it remains profoundly relevant. I've experienced this in my own life in the past 2 years. The stories that I get to hear of other people who are doing fasting regularly in their lives. As we look throughout history and the scriptures, and the purpose of fasting is completely relevant. So yes, getting rid of sugar for a period of time, not eating for a period of time, dropping social media for a period of time, but then to turn towards something else is deeply relevant for your and I's lives on some form of a regular basis. So really quickly, why this is so relevant, I think it's because it helps us to remember. First and foremost, fasting reminds us of our need. How often do you think about your needs? You think often about what's going to fulfill your needs. But how often do you sit there and say, what am I needing right now? What do I think I need? And why am I doing this? Or why am I going to this? Or why am I looking to this? Do we pause long enough to say, what do I actually need? What's happening below the surface that might be pushing me towards this? I don't know about you, but the people I'm most attracted to in life have great humility. And a part of being humble is realizing that you have need. And to realize you have need also means to realize that you cannot fulfill yourself. That your own thoughts to fulfill the needs you have will fall short. The ways you think everything should be fixed and go in a certain way will fall short. That you and I have need, and that we can actually open up to that need, not in a way that is shame-filled or guilt-driven, but there's a God who looks at each and every single one of us and says, I see your need. I see what you're desiring, and I see what you even want to reach for. I see what your natural impulse is for, but I want to meet that need. I want to be the one because I'm the only one that can. I created you. I know what you need. Can we pause long enough to recognize our need? We don't look at people, I don't think anyone ever says this, like, man, I so appreciate their self-righteousness. I'm so attracted to how they look down on other people. If you hear those things, that would be a fun conversation to hear about. But it's the people who realize they have need. They seem to be the ones in which we're most attracted to for a reason. Because they're actually open to change. They're actually open to growth. They're actually open to something beyond themselves. Do you recognize that you have need? Secondly, fasting reminds us to act. Fasting actually helps us realize that our body is a part of our spirituality. In a culture and a climate in which we oftentimes think and feel our way through things, life, faith, work, whatever it is, the body actually holistically brings the entirety of our lives into our spiritual reality. And it reminds us to act, that our bodies actually can move outwards. It's a way of devoting ourselves, our entirety of our lives. Because if you do something, we can oftentimes say that talk is cheap. When someone says something, you might want to tell them, well, make your words sweat. Don't just say it, sing it. Right? You can say many things. I love Jesus. I am a Christian. I believe this. And then we would naturally be like, well, show me. What if God was just communicating to you and I love you guys so much. I love you. Do you not see that? No, he acted. The greatest way that he could demonstrate his love for you and I was through the life, the death, and the resurrection of his son. He actually put wheels on the thing in which he said. Fasting is a way for you and I to physically enact the devotion in which we say that we have. To resist everything else that we think we need, that we want, that's going to fulfill all of our desires and say, no, I am actually going to act upon this. And I would argue that fasting is one of the greatest ways to come in touch with the poor. Because it's hard to empathize and come in touch with the poor when we continue to be filled by everything that the poor do not have. Missing a meal and skipping meals and resisting things in which you easily have access to or ways and connecting with and joining the people who do not have. Dorothy Day, who began the humanitarian work of the Catholic worker movement, how shall we have the means to help our brother who is in need? We can do without those unnecessary things which become habits, cigarettes, liquor, coffee, tea, candy, soda, soft drinks, and those foods at meals which only titillate the palate. We all have these habits, the youngest and the oldest, and we have to die to ourselves in order to live. We have to put off the old man and put on Christ. Fasting is a way in which you and I are reminded to act on the faith in which we inhabit. Lastly, fasting reminds us to receive. And I think this might be the most beautiful of all. You and I are dependent to receive the love and the mercy of a God who cares for you and I and meets us. That our posture isn't just to create and move and do, it's to receive. It's to sit back and say, God, I can't make myself go here. I cannot fulfill my desires. This will not fulfill my desires. I am in a posture of receptivity. This is the way to disrupt your thoughts and your feelings through faith. That when we feel off with God, when we think we're off with God, this is a way in which we say, God, I can't feel my way through this. I can't think my way through this. I am in a posture of receiving only what you can offer me. Fasting shifts what you will receive in your life, because we all know what you receive when you purchase more. We all know what you receive when you drink more. We all know what you receive when you website more. We all know what we receive when whatever it is. You know what you receive every single time. And man, those things feel good for a moment. And in the end of the day, it does not get to the desires and the needs in which you and I have. So I start to close. I'm going to invite the worship team forward. Here's what we're going to do. The next 21 days is prayer and fasting across our city with a group of churches in Clovis and Fresno. And so we as a church are choosing to participate in 21 days of prayer and fasting. And I'm inviting us to try this on. If it's not food yet for you, let it be one thing. Let it be a thing in which you know that you need and you look to dependence in. Set it aside for a part of your day. Set it aside for an hour. Set it aside for half a day. If it's fasting, start somewhere small. Skip a meal. The next week, skip 2 meals. Or skip a meal once every 3 days. There's ways of doing this to ease your way into it. But again, it's not abstinence. It's not just saying no to something. It's also turning towards something. And so what I invite us to as a church, you might have a reading plan. You might have ways in which you pray and engage Scripture. But I would invite you to do the Lectio 365 app together. This is a way that's, yes, you got to be on your phone, so if you're trying to fast from that, we'll figure out something else. But that you and I might be going through the same reflections, scriptures, and prayer together each morning for the next 21 days. There's a reflection in the morning, there's a reflection in the evening. So now you're resisting something and you're receiving something else at the same time. You're creating space for us together to fast and to turn to what's sacred, to turn to what actually can fulfill you and I, to give us more meaning and purpose, and can actually offer us the love in which God has for us and be more open to actually passing on that love in which we've received. And then what we'll do is different churches host it each night. There's different worship services. You can go to midtown.church/fasting. This is new to you. We have a guide there of what fasting is, how to do it. The app is there. And then at University Vineyard on the 21st, you're invited to be at a worship service. It's not our Holy Spirit night, double stacked that week. But if you would like to go on that Tuesday, it's a way in which we go worship with churches across our city to be reminded we're not the only church here. And that across differences, we can still display a unity in which God's invited us to. So will you fast with me over the next 21 days? Will you try this on? I can't guarantee how it's going to go, but I know that it won't go at all if you don't try. So can we do something together? These next 21 days, I'll be talking about it each week. But what would it look like for you and I to fast? Because here's the reality. I imagine Midtown being a place in which we devote ourselves to something greater than ourselves. Together. We don't just move through this life or this life of faith, just kind of feeling or thinking our way through it, but we actually act. We actually follow it up with giving things up, which keep us from growing closer with God. Imagine a place in which you and I are sacrificing things to communicate our love and devotion for God and for other people, to where we actually choose to do hard things that don't make sense, that don't add up, believing that there is a God who will give us more than we could ever do on our own. And if you're here this morning you're not sure about God or faith or Jesus or whatever it is, if you want to find out, these are the practices to take on. Because the reality is that you need direction in your life. The reality is you need something greater than yourself to show you what to do, who to become, and where to go. And you have great need that you cannot fulfill on your own. You need a Savior. In this, fasting is a way of being courageous, to actually do hard things in your life. And I know that all of us in this room want that, because more will come from it than just taking the easy road. Imagine us being a place that's devoted in our mind, in our feelings, but mostly in our actions, to form our mind and our feelings more deeply, more grounded. Why don't we stand together?